Anyway, thanks for joining us, Idil. How are you today?
I'm all right. I've been working. I'm good. How are you?
All right, all right. Just chilling in the very cold house, but I'm fine otherwise. So you've worked a lot previously with paint, and as of late, you've focused your practice sort of a lot more towards textiles and embroidery, particularly during the last lockdown. What inspired this sort of change of pace and interest, and what is it about sort of textiles that perhaps fascinates you?
To begin with, I stopped painting when I stopped having a studio at university because I was painting like really large scale. And then I just suddenly had my bedroom and tried to carry on doing massive oil paintings, and that didn't go very well. Then I just got into a bit of a slump and wasn't really doing much at all. But I would say like the reason why I started doing sewing, it's kind of something that throughout my whole life I've done a bit of, like different, even when I was little, just like playing with material, doing little sewing things. I really like the physical, like actually manipulating fabric, stuff like that. I guess it's kind of similar to the way that I would use oil paint quite thickly. And the way that I started doing embroidery was like kind of just interpreting my sketches and drawings that I'd done, rather than turning them into paintings. I was turning them into embroideries. So yeah, basically just looking for a new medium that wasn't taking up so much space in my house. And then I just got really into it and started and realized that actually it really suited me.
I suppose that is the case for a lot of painters when they just abandon the old painty craft.
Yeah.
So I know when we spoke sort of before this, you kind of described yourself as, creative in nature. And obviously for a lot of artists, they are creative through and through, and that's just a thing, in fact, no matter the practice or project. At what point did you sort of come to the understanding that you didn't need to push yourself towards this sort of idealized version of an artist that we were sort of speaking about before, that a lot of sort of creatives sort of strive for? They sort of strive for this sort of romanticized version of an artist that is kind of sometimes so far from the truth and so unattainable that it's just almost nonsense. When did you sort of come to that realization that you didn't need to push yourself that far?
So I think, my whole life I'd kind of had that image of me being like an artist and having that kind of lifestyle, and just like spending all my days like very fantasy world that's not many people are actually able to achieve, just like spending all my days in a studio painting. But yeah, then when I was doing my art degree, I also felt quite a lot of pressure from my tutors and stuff it was like encouragement really, but I took it on as quite like more like pressure. And I felt like, oh, after I leave, I have to, like get some kind of, like win some awards that they've told me to apply for, or like get all of these different things, like get a studio, do blah, blah, blah. And then it kind of just got to the point where I just wasn't doing anything and I wasn't making any artwork, because I think the pressure of it was just too much. And like by the time I'd thought through a project, I'd already come to the conclusion that it was never going to work and given up on it. So yeah, I was just in a bit of a slump. And then I slowly started just doing little things, like making things for people, doing a bit more drawing, and also getting into like embroidery, textile stuff. And that kind of made me realize that I don't have to, and also just having a job that's not just being a freelance artist made me realize that like I don't actually have to achieve, that isn't a necessary goal. I don't have to be the artist that I imagined. I can just like be a creative person, and actually that gives me a lot more pleasure, and it's a lot less pressure on myself to just, when I have time, whenever I want to, just like find some way to be creative, however small it is.
I suppose there are also artists that, they're centered on their one thing, but for those that sort of perhaps are unsure, to adapt that sort of outlook is not necessarily a bad thing, because you are still essentially creative by doing this and that and the other. That sort of leads me on as well to the next question about where you were talking about sort of dreaming up these projects that perhaps wouldn't ever get finished, sort of thing. And I know that you mentioned before that you sort of deal with anxiety, depression, and chronic fatigue as well, chronic fatigue syndrome. And we all know these can sort of interact and overlap with each other. Can you tell us a bit more about what chronic fatigue syndrome is, what it is, and how that sort of affects your day to day?
The way it manifests for me is that, like, generally very fatigued and that have like very little energy a lot of the time. And because I'm working, that means that by the time I get to my free time, my weekends or evenings, I'm so exhausted most of the time I can't really do anything other than just like relax or just lay in bed, basically. And it also means I get sick very often, so like something like a flu, and when I do, it lasts a really long time. So I don't know, it very often, don't need to go into details, but like, you know, if I get a small cold, I can end up being in bed for like 3 weeks, really, really bad flu kind of thing. So yeah, essentially it just means that I don't have a lot of free time to myself to do the things that I would like to do. A lot of my free time is just spent recovering.
How is that? And I think I'm not alone as well in the little known knowledge of sort of chronic fatigue, because I think before we spoke it was something that I wasn't aware of. I mean, is that something that is like perhaps hereditary? How do you sort of cope with it? What are the remedies per se, or is it a case of just, you know, R&R and relaxing, having to take out an extreme amount of time? How do you sort of function with it?
Again, like for people it's different. A lot of people, chronic fatigue syndrome is just one of quite a few illnesses that they have that go alongside each other. That's quite common. But another thing is that like it's impossible to get a diagnosis. Like people do, but I've been trying to get an official diagnosis for 10 years and like I'm still only just getting people to recognize that and put a label on what it is. Very recently I had that. But obviously if you don't have a label for something, it's very hard to kind of figure out how to deal with it. But what I have started doing is just kind of trying to change my lifestyle. Like I've stopped working full time. I still work full time, but some of the time I work from home. I've kind of changed my diet a lot, and really thinking about like I can't really drink alcohol anymore, which is really sad because I love drinking, but I had to come to terms with the fact that like it could make me ill for weeks after drinking like even just a couple glasses of wine. That's helped a lot.
Oh wow. I mean, I know you just sort of mentioned as well that, and we kind of touched on it as well, the sort of how we obviously everyone is different, and chronic fatigue so often sort of accompanies many other things, and obviously the chronic fatigue sort of comes hand in hand with the anxiety and the depression to some extent. And I know when we spoke previously that undertaking sort of bigger creative projects can lead to this sort of level of anxiety and sort of fear that you will be struck down with this extreme tiredness through the chronic fatigue. As sort of both, you know, an artist and an art technician at a school, how are you balancing the sort of your creative projects with the chronic fatigue? Have you managed to sort of find something that works for you, and are you able to balance them as effectively as you can? How's the sort of process for you?
For one thing, I get a lot of like fulfillment from my job working in a school as an art technician. That's like honestly the best job that I could have at the moment, because a lot of what I do there is creative, and I'll find myself making things that I would never make in my own time, in my own practice. And that's just really fun to just like have a hand in lots of different materials and techniques. And also like I do a lot of just like one-on-one kind of teaching with kids and helping them. So I do find that really fulfilling. But then, yeah, like kind of as I said before, in my own time, I think something that's really changed is that I'm okay with the fact that it might take me ages to get one little thing done, and that's okay, because like I'm still making the thing, and the process is, you know, part of it for me. And yeah, just not being so hard on myself, basically, not being like, oh, I have all of these ideas and I want to do all of them. Just like, okay, I have all these ideas, I'm going to write them down, and then like at some point in my life I might do them, and that's fine. I don't need to do everything today.
Does it feel like you have to perhaps almost limit the scope? I suppose you're kind of having to, in some ways, limit the scope of your ideas in some ways, then, I suppose, in a way that is achievable and manageable. Yeah,
definitely. There have been like things that I've wanted to do and I've just put it aside and been like, oh, I might do that one day. But at the moment, when I'm working essentially full time, even if some of it is at home, I am working full time. I just don't have the time or energy to do it. But I'm just kind of glad that I'm back to at least making some stuff, really, because I was definitely in a big slump, post-university slump, which is common for art students.
This idea of feeling like a fake and a phony, and this idea of imposter syndrome is pretty rife between sort of young creatives and all the rest of it. And the reality is that obviously a lot of artists, young or old, I suppose, have secondary jobs, and this duality sort of causes its own level of anxiety, particularly in regards to this imposter syndrome. So it's kind of almost as if people feel that their practice should be their sole source of income, which obviously is what everyone strives to want, but it's almost as if they're not real artists without that. I mean, what's your sort of experience of that?
It's actually like crazy that isn't normalized, because I don't know like I think I know one person who's an art graduate who is just working as an artist full time, and like having gone to do art at university and have friends who are also artists, like I know a lot of people who have done that, and the majority of them are not working as full-time artists. And so yeah, I don't know why that's not normalized when it's what everyone's doing, basically. But yeah, it is obviously more difficult if you're doing a job that's maybe nothing to do with anything creative. Yeah, I definitely have imposter syndrome. I still have that all the time. Like when I'm in my room and I'm like doing a little embroidery or sewing something, and then I go on Instagram and someone who is my age is like showing in a big gallery, I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I even doing? Like, how can I even say that I'm an artist, or how can I even like pretend to myself that I'm a creative person? But, you know, I loop back around again and realize, like, if, you know, I'm not even trying to show in galleries, so why should I expect that I would be? So yeah, I think it's just like having to take a step back and be realistic.
Outside of working from home, especially now during sort of lockdown part 2, how have you been occupying yourself, particularly as we're into this second wave of staying at home? How are you keeping calm and creative?
Keeping what?
How are you keeping calm and creative, Idil? What the hell are you doing at home apart from working?
Well, I've just moved house and I've been like nesting, basically.
Oh,
I've been like nesting for winter. I've been setting myself up. I've been looking after my plants. I've been taking my housemate's dog for walks, which has been so good for me. And also just like a lot of rolling around on the floor with the dog. That calms me down a lot. But in terms of being creative, yeah, like I do. So working from home half time is actually just a new thing. So it's very recent that I've started doing that, but already I've just got so much more time, like gaining 2 hours that I would usually spend commuting is like amazing. And I can just spend that time, yeah, working on my own projects.